The moment she was thrown into the ocean mattered because it was the kind that freezes itself into memory. It was not a slow buildup or a drawn-out threat. It was sudden, violent, and carried out by people who believed the ocean could do their work for them. The night was colder than it should have been for the season, the kind of cold that makes every sound sharper. Waves rolled hard against the rocks, and for a split second she thought it was just another surge hitting the wall below. But the grip on her arms tightened, and the truth hit faster than the wind. She was not near danger. She was already in it. They moved with the confidence of people who thought they were in control. They were certain no one was watching. They had picked the far corner of the coast where the streetlights flickered and the fence line sagged. They assumed she would not fight back. In their minds, the story ended with her pulled under, swept out, and forgotten by morning. They did not worry about who she was or what connection she had. They saw her as someone who could be erased without consequence. That mistake shaped everything that followed. When they reached the edge, she felt the shift in air, the drop in temperature, and the smell of salt thickening around her. The ocean below was restless, black and loud, but there was a rhythm to it. She noticed that rhythm even in panic. She felt how the water surged in, then pulled back with a force that hinted at depth and danger. They thought the noise of the wind and waves would drown out her voice. They never considered that sound carries differently over open water. They never considered who else might hear. She fought, but they had the advantage. Height, strength, surprise. They dragged her to the rail. Her shoes scraped the concrete. Her breath caught in her throat. The shock of what was happening hit her brain in stages. First disbelief, then fear, then a quick flare of anger that was stronger than both. She tried to twist free. She tried to plant her feet. For a moment, she got a grip on the rail. Fingers white, knuckles locked. That moment did something important. It forced them to work harder. It forced them to make noise. In their effort to pry her loose, they exposed themselves to the one thing they had not counted on. Attention. The ocean below kept pounding like a warning drum. She felt the air rush around her as they lifted her up and over. Her body turned just enough for her to catch a final angle of the shoreline. A final look at the dark silhouette of buildings in the distance. Lights blinking in windows. People inside going about their night, unaware of the choice playing out at the water's edge. Then the grip released. Gravity took over. She dropped fast, faster than her mind could keep up with. The ocean rose to meet her like a wall. The impact stole every bit of air from her lungs. The cold punched into her ribs. She did not sink at first. She slapped the surface hard, then felt herself pulled downward by momentum and weight. Water rushed past her ears, her eyes, her open mouth. She kicked, but the shock slowed her. Salt burned her throat. Everything blurred. For a moment, she could not tell which way was up. She felt the pull of the current dragging her sideways, not downward, which confused her instincts even more. She forced herself to focus on one thing. Light. Any light. She opened her eyes against the sting and saw a faint glow in one direction. She reached for it, pushing hard with arms and legs that trembled from the cold. Her muscles screamed, but she fought to rise. When her head broke the surface again, she sucked in air so sharp it hurt. Waves slapped her. The current pulled her backward. She spit out salt and tried to keep her head above water. She looked to the shore. She could not see the attackers clearly anymore. Only shapes, moving fast, like they realized the moment had slipped out of their grasp. The world around her narrowed into one simple truth. They thought the ocean would finish the job. They believed the water was on their side. They never considered that the stretch of coastline where they chose to dump her was watched more closely than almost any other. They did not know they had thrown her into territory monitored by people who trained to read the water the way others read a map. The first hint of that truth arrived as a low mechanical sound cutting through the wind. The mistake her attackers made was believing the ocean was on their side. They treated it like a tool, something predictable, something that would behave the way they expected. They assumed the water would hide what they did, absorb the evidence, and carry her far enough out that no one would ever learn the truth. Their confidence came from ignorance. They saw the ocean as a simple force. They had no idea how complex it really is or how quickly it can turn against the very people who try to use it. They thought the darkness gave them cover. From the cliff, the water looked flat and harmless. They did not see the shifting currents beneath the surface that moved in different directions at the same time. They did not feel the pull of the undertow that could drag a grown adult 50 feet sideways in less than a minute. They did not understand how sound traveled across open water. They believed the crash of waves would swallow the noise of a struggle, but the ocean can amplify certain sounds and carry them farther than any of them imagined. They made choices based on assumptions instead of knowledge. They underestimated her too. They thought fear would make her quiet and still. They expected panic to break her focus. They figured the cold would shock her into helplessness. But fear sparked something else in her. It sharpened her senses. It pushed her to grab at anything she could use, whether it was a piece of the broken rail, a pocket of air between waves, or the faint glimmer of shoreline lights she could aim toward. They believed she would give up quickly. They never planned for her refusing to sink. When she hit the water and disappeared below the surface, they turned away too fast. They did not watch long enough to see how she resurfaced sooner than they expected. They did not notice that her head popped up on the opposite side of the current from where they thought she would drift. They did not know enough about tides to realize she had been pulled into a channel that worked like a conveyor belt. They believed she would drift straight out. Instead, she was carried along the coastline toward an area lit by infrared sensors that were not visible from where they stood. They misread the environment completely. They chose that stretch of shore because it looked isolated. Old fence, broken pathway, quiet road. They thought the lack of street activity meant the whole area was ignored. They never realized that the same features that made it look abandoned made it perfect for surveillance. The bluff above the water had a line of rocks that created a natural blind spot from public view, which made it ideal for discreet training operations. They assumed the emptiness meant no one was watching. In reality, the emptiness meant the watchers did not want to be seen. They also misjudged timing. The tide was shifting faster than usual because of a storm system 2 miles offshore. They had checked the weather, but only the surface forecast, not the marine warnings. That shift made the waves louder and the current stronger. The extra noise helped mask her gasps, but it also made their footsteps echo in ways they did not anticipate. They did not think anyone else would hear them dragging her toward the rail. They never considered that someone trained to separate useful sound from chaos might be listening. Their biggest mistake, though, was believing the ocean belonged to them for those few minutes. They acted like they controlled the situation because they controlled her movement on land. They thought water functioned like a closed room where they dictated the terms. They forgot that water has rules of its own. It moves how it wants, carries what it wants, reveals what it wants. It does not protect aggressors. It does not hide sins for long. Every disturbance leaves a trail. They did not see the small flash on the water's surface that appeared when she broke through and inhaled. They did not realize the current spun her toward a buoy marked for training use, which carried sensors that picked up the disturbance instantly. They did not know the device relayed that data to a monitoring station where someone checked anomalies every few minutes. They had no idea that their decision to throw her in the water aligned perfectly with the moment a patrol was already nearby, running a routine sweep of the coastline. They believed they had chosen the perfect place and the perfect time. In reality, every move they made pushed her closer to the one zone where the wrong people to cross had eyes on everything. The ocean they trusted to erase her was already working against them before they even turned to leave the bluff. The presence of Navy SEALs changed the stakes the moment their systems picked up the disturbance in the water. Their training teaches them to notice what others overlook. A splash in the wrong place, a shift in current, a pattern that does not match the tide report. They treat the ocean like a living thing with moods, signals, warnings. When something interrupts that natural rhythm, they respond fast, not because they expect danger, but because they know danger rarely announces itself. That night, the alert came through as a simple anomaly, a small reading on a screen, the kind most people would ignore. But SEALs do not ignore anything connected to the water. Not at night, not in rough conditions, not when the pattern feels off. On the patrol boat, 2 operators were already scanning the coastline. They were not expecting trouble, just running a standard route. Then the sensor pinged. One of them leaned forward and adjusted the screen. narrowing in on the heat signatures forming near the buoy. At first it looked like the usual mix of wave friction and marine life, but there was something else. A shape that moved differently. A shape that struggled instead of drifted. A shape that broke rhythm with the tide. That was all it took. They changed course without hesitation. They did not wait for orders because they did not need them. Water emergencies are handled the same way every time. Faster is safer. While the boat turned toward the point, another SEAL on the team scanned the shoreline through night optics. He spotted faint motion near the bluff. Not steady steps, but jerky shapes, moving fast and low. He adjusted focus and caught the moment two figures slipped behind a broken fence. From that angle, it did not look like hikers or late-night wanderers. It looked like people trying to leave without being seen. He logged their position and relayed it to the team without attaching assumptions. SEALs do not guess motive. They track behavior. The behavior was enough to raise the alert level. In the water, she was fighting to keep her head up as the waves lifted and slammed her in unpredictable patterns. She did not know help was already on the way. She only knew she had to keep moving. Every inhale tasted like salt and metal. Every exhale felt like she was giving something up. She kicked harder when she saw a faint glow in the distance, a small beam sweeping across the surface. She did not know that beam belonged to people who spent half their lives training for moments exactly like this. The patrol boat closed the distance faster than she expected. They cut the engine before they reached her so the waves would not push her underwater. One operator leaned over the edge with a line ready. Another kept eyes on the shoreline, tracking the fleeing shapes in case they were connected. Their movements were coordinated, sharp, practiced. They did not waste a second. The ocean was not their enemy. It was their workplace. They understood how to use the rhythm of the waves instead of fighting against them. When the swell lifted her toward the hull, they timed the reach perfectly and grabbed hold before she slipped under again. Pulling someone out of cold water is more complicated than simply hauling them aboard. Her body was shaking from the temperature drop, and the waves kept knocking her against the side of the boat. The SEAL who grabbed her braced himself and pulled upward with a controlled motion that kept her head stable. Another operator helped lock her in place using the line. They moved like a single unit, each anticipating the other's next step without speaking. Every part of the process was designed to limit the risk of drowning, shock, or further injury. They got her into the boat. She tried to speak, but the cold had locked her jaw tight. One of them wrapped a thermal blanket around her, while another secured a float line to mark the exact spot where she had surfaced. They wanted to track the current patterns later. They wanted to know what had pushed her into that area. They wanted to understand everything the attackers had not considered. While one operator stayed with her, another monitored the shore. The figures near the bluff had broken into a run. That alone changed the situation. Innocent people do not sprint away from a coastline moments after someone nearly drowns. The SEALs marked their direction, plotted the path they were likely to take, and called in a secondary team. Not because they knew the full story yet, but because water rescues often come with land-based threats. They prepare for both. Her attackers had envisioned a silent disappearance. What they got was a full shift in control. Once the SEALs were involved, the ocean was no longer a place for their crime to hide. It became the starting point of an operation that could trace movements, locate evidence, and track every decision made along the shoreline. The presence of the SEALs turned the water from a weapon into a witness. The shift from victim to survivor did not happen all at once. It happened in pieces. It started the moment she felt hands grab her and realized the world she thought she understood had tilted. At first, she reacted like anyone would. Shock hit her body before her mind could make sense of the danger. Her breath turned shallow. Her muscles froze. She felt helpless in a way she had never experienced. The ground under her feet was no longer stable. The people she thought she could reason with had already decided she did not get a voice. They expected fear to paralyze her. For a few seconds it did. They took those seconds as confirmation she would not fight. But fear has layers. The top layer is panic, the kind that blinds and overwhelms. Under that is something harder to break. She found that deeper layer when one of the attackers shoved her forward and she stumbled. Her palms scraped the concrete. Pain fired up her arms, and that pain snapped her out of the freeze. She felt anger surge beneath the fear. She felt her instincts kick in. She pushed back, clawed at the rail, twisted her body, anything to break their grip. She did not win. They were stronger and coordinated. But the moment she resisted was the moment she stopped being passive. That mattered. Even when she was dragged toward the edge, she was no longer moving like someone who accepted her fate. She was forcing them to work harder, to make noise, to lose control. When she hit the water, the shock swallowed everything. Cold shut down her thoughts. Salt burned her throat. The world flipped upside down. But even in that chaos, she did not let go of the idea that she could fight. She pushed her body toward the surface even though she could not see it. She remembered something simple from childhood, a swim lesson she barely paid attention to at the time. Reach for the light. Any light. That memory floated up from nowhere and became a lifeline. When she broke through the surface, she sucked in air that cut like glass. But she was alive. That alone was a choice she helped create. The waves kept pulling her sideways. Every time she tried to lift her head, water slapped it back down. Her clothes dragged her under. Her teeth chattered so hard it felt like they might crack. The ocean wanted her to move with it, not against it, but she did not trust drifting. She knew drifting meant losing direction. She kicked toward the faint glow of shoreline lights, even though the distance seemed impossible. Her body was shaking, and her limbs felt heavy, but survival is rarely graceful. It is messy, instinctive, and driven by the stubborn refusal to quit. She did not think in words anymore. She thought in actions. Kick, breathe, look, move. The moment she saw the beam of a patrol light sweep across the water, something inside her shifted again. It was not relief yet. Relief is fragile. It can break if the help comes too slow. What she felt instead was determination. If someone was out there looking, she needed to make herself visible. She tried to wave one arm, even though it barely rose above the surface. She tried to shout, even though her throat was raw. She fought to stay upright because sinking would erase everything she had fought for so far. When the seals reached her and pulled her onto the boat, she was shaking uncontrollably. Her vision blurred in and out. But inside, the shift had already taken root. They wrapped her in a blanket, steadied her breathing, and kept her awake. Their calm steadiness gave her something to anchor herself to. Not because they saved her, but because they treated her like someone who had already saved herself. They spoke to her directly, clearly, without pity. They asked what she remembered. She forced her mind to replay details she wished she could erase. She answered because she knew those details could turn the tide against the people who tried to erase her. As the boat cut across the water and headed toward shore, she held the blanket tight, not for warmth but for grounding. The cold was still inside her bones, but the fear was no longer in control. She looked back at the dark stretch of ocean. Minutes earlier it had been the place where she was supposed to disappear. Now it was the place where she had refused to. The moment she chose to fight, to think, to push through the cold and chaos. She crossed a line that her attackers never expected. She was no longer the person they tried to throw away. She was someone they failed to silence. She was someone who survived not by luck, but by force of will she had not known she possessed. The fast unraveling of the attackers' plan began the moment they walked away from the bluff thinking the ocean would erase everything. Their idea depended on silence, darkness, and distance. They believed they had time. They believed no one saw them. They believed she would vanish beneath the waves long before anyone noticed she was missing. They gave themselves the comfort of thinking the night was on their side. They had no idea that the first cracks had already formed before they even left the scene. They did not know the seals had picked up the disturbance. They did not know operators were watching their movements from a distance with optics that turned shadows into clear shapes. They did not know that data from the buoy had already been logged, preserved, and sent to a small observation post. Every part of their plan relied on the ocean taking care of evidence, but the ocean recorded the moment they threw her into it. Not with cameras, but with motion, compression waves, and irregular heat patterns that trained eyes knew how to interpret. As they reached the broken fence and crossed back into the dirt path, one of them looked over his shoulder. From their angle, the water looked empty. The waves rolled the way they always did. Nothing seemed out of place. They took the quiet as confirmation that they had succeeded. That false confidence was the first reason their plan unraveled. When people believe they have already gotten away with something, they start making mistakes. They loosen their guard. They stop coordinating. They start talking too loudly. They argue. They rush. Every one of those behaviors creates openings. Once on the path, they split up. One went toward the road. The other cut behind an old storage shack. They thought separating would help them disappear faster. Instead, it gave the SEALs two distinct trails to track. The operators on the boat had already marked their positions. A second team had been alerted. When the attackers broke off in different directions, it made the situation easier to analyze. People who are innocent stay together. People who are guilty scatter. Their very movement broadcast intent. As they moved through the dark, they left behind footprints on a thin layer of sand pushed inland by the wind. They thought they were walking on hard ground. They did not check behind them. They did not imagine anyone would track such faint impressions. They did not realize SEALs learned to identify movement patterns from a single shift in soil. One attacker dragged his right foot slightly. The other landed heavy on the heel of his left. Details like that matter to people trained to read terrain like language. By the time they reached the road, a patrol vehicle had already been notified. Not sirens, not lights, nothing dramatic. Just quiet positioning. The SEALs preferred to watch before confronting. They wanted to know whether the attackers tried to flee the area, hide, call someone, or double back. The attackers didn't notice the vehicle. They were too focused on getting to their own car parked farther down the road. They kept glancing at the ocean as if checking whether the night still belonged to them. That habit of looking back gave the observers clear sight lines of their faces. Meanwhile, the SEALs on the boat had secured her and sent in initial details. When she managed to speak through the cold, she gave them descriptions. Short, clipped details. Clothing. Height. The way one of them pulled her hair. The sound of their shoes on the concrete. She remembered the direction one of them dragged her from. These pieces began forming a map that matched exactly what the surveillance team was already watching unfold. The attackers thought they had erased her. Instead, she was identifying them in real time. As they reached their car, one opened the door while the other kept lookout. That small pause was enough. A SEAL unit positioned near the end of the road coordinated with local law enforcement. Quiet approach, no sirens, no flash of lights, nothing that would tip the attackers off too early. The goal was to contain, not chase. The attackers were nervous now. One paced. The other fumbled with keys. Their plan depended on a clean escape. But clean escapes don't involve shaking hands and fractured breathing. They were unraveling from inside. When they finally got into the car and tried to start it, headlights from an unmarked vehicle flicked on. Not in a dramatic burst, just a steady glow that told them they were not alone on the road anymore. Their shoulders stiffened. Their heads snapped toward the bluff instinctively, as if checking whether the ocean had betrayed them. They still did not know the SEALs were involved. They only knew something was wrong. They only knew their window was closing. What they thought would be a silent disappearance had instead turned into a chain of traces, signals, movements, and observations that pieced together their entire crime. Everything they thought the ocean would hide had already surfaced. Their plan did not collapse because of one mistake. It collapsed because the moment they threw her into the water, they created a ripple they could not control. The lesson about control, courage, and consequences began to take shape long before anyone involved realized it. The attackers believed they controlled the situation. They believed strength came from force, secrecy, and the illusion that no one would ever push back. They acted as if control was something you could take from another person simply by frightening them. They treated courage as weakness. They treated consequences as something that happened to other people. Their entire plan was built on a false idea of power. The moment reality shifted, they had nothing left to hold on to. True control did not come from them dragging her toward the bluff. It came from her decision to fight even when the odds were stacked against her. She grabbed the rail. She forced noise into the night they wanted to keep quiet. She made them work harder, and every extra moment they spent forcing the situation created more chances for them to be noticed. Control is not always about winning in the moment. Sometimes it is about disrupting the path someone tries to trap you in. She did that without knowing she was setting off the first cracks in their plan. Courage does not always feel like bravery. Most of the time it feels like fear mixed with movement. She felt terrified when they lifted her over the edge. She felt the shock of falling, the sting of cold water, and the panic of losing direction. But even in that panic, she kept searching for a way back to the surface. She kicked. She reached. She chose light over darkness, even when the light looked faint and far away. Courage is often quiet. It is often desperate. But it changes everything because it refuses to let someone else's violence define the ending. The SEALs brought another layer to the lesson. Their courage looked different. It was steady and practiced. They were trained to respond to danger without hesitation, but they were also trained to respect the ocean in a way the attackers never understood. They did not force control over the water. They worked with it. They read it. They anticipated it. Their presence showed the difference between power gained through knowledge and power assumed through intimidation. One was real. The other fell apart the moment conditions shifted. Consequences came in waves. First small, then larger, then unavoidable. The attackers never expected anyone to survive. They never expected anyone to watch them from a distance. They never expected the ocean to carry their crime toward the very people most prepared to analyze it. They believed consequences were something they could outrun. Instead, consequences adapted faster than they did. Every choice they made sent ripples outward. Every ripple carried information. Their footsteps marked the ground. Their rushed whispers cut through the wind. Their movement away from the scene drew attention instead of avoiding it. Consequences do not disappear just because someone wishes they would. They collect evidence patiently. For her, consequences looked different. They came in the form of clarity. After the shock faded and she started to breathe steadily again, she realized her survival was not a moment of luck. It was a collection of decisions she made even when it felt impossible. It was the way she fought on the cliff, the way she reached for light underwater, the way she refused to let her fear lead her into stillness. Her courage forced the night to shift. It changed the narrative the attackers thought they controlled. It turned her from someone they tried to erase into someone they had to face. The SEALs understood consequences in a professional way. They documented every detail. They tracked every movement. They followed each clue without assumption. Their discipline showed how consequences are built through action, not talk. They did not need dramatic gestures or loud declarations. They simply followed the chain the attackers left behind. Control returned to the right hands not because anyone demanded it, but because the people who understood the weight of responsibility stepped into the space the attackers tried to dominate. In the end, the lesson stretched beyond what happened on the bluff or in the water. It showed that control taken through fear collapses quickly. Control earned through clarity and action holds. It showed that courage can rise even in the coldest, darkest moments. It showed that consequences come for those who believe they are above them. It showed that a person thrown into the ocean did not vanish. She became the one thing the attackers never planned for.